And in the spirit of reconciliation, not only with technology, but more importantly, with our Indigenous neighbors, we wish to acknowledge the enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories they traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection that they have to this place, the land, the water, the sky, and all that live on, in, and above it. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples that have taken care of this place and who continue to care for it. And we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our decisions and our actions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take actions towards real truth and reconciliation. Miigwech. Council, any declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? Seeing none, we will continue to our first motion. And I have moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor Bocheck. Be it resolved, the council adopts the planning agenda of April 4th, 2023 as circulated. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And first up on our agenda now is the Municipal Act public meeting, which means I get to read to you. This morning, there's a public meeting scheduled for one Shore Road closing application. I will briefly summarize the procedure to be utilized for the meeting. First, the clerk will advise council as to when, how, and to whom notice of the public meeting was circulated for the proposed Shore Road closing being considered. Next, staff will advise of the purpose and effect of the bylaw and provide for any other information that is relevant to the applications, and staff will summarize any correspondence on file. From there, the public will have an opportunity to speak and provide comments to the bylaw being considered. Please be respectful of time and be concise with your comments. All commentators are requested to state their name and address. Council will then have an opportunity to provide comments for clarification. I now declare this meeting to be a public meeting pursuant to the Municipal Act of 2001 C-25 as amended to deal with the following proposed Shore Road closing bylaws. R22-12 for 7958 Go Home Lake Shore. To our clerk. Sorry.
Notice of the public meeting was published in a newspaper and notice was sent to the abutting neighbors in the close proximity of the property at least 20 days prior to today's meeting.
All right, with that, to our staff.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. This morning's Shore Road Allowance application is for R22-12 for 7958 Go Home Lake Shore. The Shore Road Allowance has been requested by the applicants to allow for future development. The Shore Road Allowance for parts 1, 2, 3, and 4 is for 6,245.3 square meters at a cost of $12 per square meter for a purchase price of $74,943.60 plus HST. The property is zoned shoreline residential type 1, and there are no open building permits on file. Here we have a location map of the subject lands, as well as an aerial image and a site sketch. And you can see here some of the existing structures are located on the Shore Road Allowance, which is on part 2. And finally, the survey. I don't see the applicants in attendance this morning, so if you have any questions for myself, I'm happy to answer them. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we do not have any applicants or the general public in on listed, shall we say, or signed up, I will now turn it over to council to see if there are any questions of council regards to the Shore Road Allowance. Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you. Here we go. Couple of questions. The calculation. I'm just trying to understand the sort of the survey, for example. how much, I know this may sound irrelevant, but how much land is actually owned outside of the Shore Road Allowance? Is it like 2 acres or do we have any record of that? I don't see it on the survey, but maybe I'm missing something. And I'll tell you why I'm asking the question.
Through your worship to Councillor Cooper, I don't have that offhand, but I could look it up. I just have to go on our GIS system. So if you just give me a couple minutes, I can get that for you.
All right, the reason I'm asking is that this is a peninsula. Obviously, that's a lot of shoreline when you have a peninsula. If you have 2 acres of land and $75,000 worth of shore road allowance, I'm kind of thinking that's an incredible number. So I wanted to know about that. And I thought we were also using a linear versus square meter in our shore road allowance purchasing. Is that correct or not correct?
Through your worship, we are doing that going forward, but this application was received prior to the passing of the new policy. So we're using, it was already a survey that was been deposited using the square meters.
So it's square meters times 12 versus 200 and whatever dollars. And the line that you're using to measure the shore road allowance, is it which line is it that constitutes, where is the border, I guess is the question of the calculation that you're making here? If I'm looking at the survey, or what should I look at to sort of get a picture of that?
We're using the water's edge.
So it's the water's edge line.
Yeah, it is a little bit confusing looking at the survey because it's broken up into several parts.
So I'm reading here. So it's the outer line that says original waters, doesn't say edge, but I'm looking at the survey. Is that it? The one that's sort of a dotted, long dotted line, long dots, long dashes, I guess they are.
No, it's the solid line that we're using.
Oh, it's the one that goes in and out, or the inner line. Sure. Survey marks, the survey locations. It's the inner solid line, is that correct?
Yeah, the outer line and the inner line.
Oh, so it's not the sort of one that's really straight, it's the one that goes in and out, and then there's an inner line way in, so to speak, near the septic system. I'm just looking at the survey. Just trying to understand what we measured here, that's all.
If I understand the survey correctly, there was a original shore road allowance, which was exceptionally smooth. And then a later shore road allowance, and I suspect because the water level changed over time in Go Home Lake, that the current shore road, sorry, the current shoreline is significantly higher than the old one was before the lake was flooded. And I'm guessing that that's part of the explanation why there's, in a sense, 2 different shore road allowances on that survey.
So, but the Go Home Lake was flooded, so that's what it's been for the last, whatever.
Half century anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know why anything would have any other bearing on it. That I'm just trying to understand it. It seems if there's a couple of acres of land here and you're paying $75,000 for shore road allowance. Wow.
It's certainly a significant piece of real estate they're acquiring.
Well, they want it, I guess. I'm just thinking, wow. You're going to find out for us, Sydney, though, how much land is here?
David, Mr. Smith's looking it up right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council on this matter? Councillor Hazelton, please.
I would be interested in understanding what the new zoning bylaw requirements with the linear, what impact that would have had on this. Because I guess we've already passed the new bylaw, and if the cost to the resident is substantially less, I would not want to see us holding onto an old bylaw policy when in fact we could be more resident friendly, if you will. Thank you.
Ms. Wade,
Our lawyers are aware of the new bylaw. Traditionally, it's always been the price at the time of the application, whether that's lesser or greater. I don't know offhand if this would have been less or more. It's a substantial piece of land that is much larger than most of ours that we would have, as well as the way it's would need to be drawn out causes more deviations as it is a peninsula versus just a straight plot of land.
I'm familiar with that. I just think that there may be policies, but I believe council can override those policies on a case by case basis if we saw a desire to do that. I'm not saying we have, but I would think that if the new policy was a substantial reduction, that I think that would be more reasonable and fair. If not, if I don't want to make a big issue out of it, if it's not going to make a big difference, but if it did make a significant difference, I think we should be aware of that. Thank you.
Ms. Deputy Clerk.
Through your worship. So the applicant would have to go back to the surveyor to get those measurements if we were going to base it off of the new policy, and it would cost the applicant more money.
I understand that. And so, if that was the policy we forced the resident through, spending $5,000 to have that change to save, 20 or 30,000 bucks would certainly be in his interest. So that's why I asked the question, what would the cost be under the new policy? Because the resident may want to exercise that as an option, kill the current application and go with the new policy.
I know the line is being measured as like a straight line. However, this would kind of be more of a V shape kind of situation. But the price per linear meter is the equivalent of us selling per square meter. So it's not like there wouldn't be a substantial, if there is a difference, it wouldn't be substantial enough. That would probably warrant the difference of going back and having a new survey drawn.
And it's quite possible that the new policy would be more expensive because I noticed in this, the width of the shore road allowance varies significantly. Whereas the linear one is assuming a full 60 feet or whatever the amount was, shore road allowance. So therefore, in this case, they're probably actually saving money by using the old system. That would be my guess. She hasn't said yet.
We don't know. The reason I'm asking all these questions is that I don't know that I've ever seen a shore road allowance at this amount of money. Typically, it's $5,000 or $10,000. This is incredible.
Through your worship, the applicant is aware of the cost. They know how much this is going to cost. They wanted to purchase their entire shore road allowance. It's up to the applicant to go forward with the application. And just to confirm the acreage, it's 1.2 acres is what GeoHub says, 1.2 acres.
1.2 acres with $75,000 worth of shore road allowance. I rest my case. Thank you. That sounds incredible. Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Jarvis.
Sorry, just to follow up on that, is it not possible for us to give applicants during the stage where we're sort of transitioning from one form of shore road allowance calculation to another? In other words, people who have put in applications prior to our bylaw change, giving them the option of looking at either of the two options and seeing which works best for them? Would that not be, I'm thinking of moving forward. I don't know how many more we've got in the pipeline. And maybe we don't have any, which is great. But if we do, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to at least let people consider that those options. You're going one way or the other.
Through your worship to Councillor Jarvis, I really don't think the price difference, like for what applicants are gonna pay to go back to their surveyors and have to go through the length of time going to the land registry office, I don't think the price difference is gonna be significant. I can't imagine any applicants wanting to do that. It's something we can offer them, but they're just gonna delay their application any further.
No, I understand that. I think we've got an egregious case here, as Councillor Cooper has pointed out. We've got a significant, piece of shoreline here because of the shape of the land. And I would side with both Councillors Cooper and Hazelton in saying that there may be, in this case specifically, the possibility of significant savings in going the other way, even to the point of having to pay for the additional survey. I'm sorry to do that, but maybe we should be deferring this for that option to be made available.
Ms. Way.
Our previous policy outlines without the payment, but it outlines there is a caveat that someone does not have to purchase the entire shore road if there is substantial size. So this person had the opportunity to purchase one half or another half, for example. They're choosing to purchase the whole portion because they want to purchase the whole portion. I understand it's more money, but it's also substantially larger than the majority of shore roads we have closed. Right? So that's their choice. They are aware of the cost. If staff were of the impression that we thought it'd be cheaper to offer them the new price, we would have done so.
I also think it's worth noting that when I look at the survey, they're basically doubling the size of the property they own by purchasing their shore road allowance. And to me, doubling my property for $75,000 is not a bad price. No, I don't.
Except for the property tax
But
implications.
anyway, I think we have to respect that the applicants have asked to buy their shore road allowance. Staff have gone through the exercise to set it up and calculate the amount. And the applicants want us to continue, so I don't see why we shouldn't. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, your worship. When we passed the bylaw for the linear versus the square area, I did a number of analyses in the 2022 purchases and met with our deputy clerk to talk about peninsulas and properties exactly like this. And at that time, we discussed how it's not a straight line measurement across a peninsula. It follows the points of the peninsula in an effort to make the two calculations more or less equivalent, regardless of the shape of the property. So I do appreciate, this is a lot of money, and it would be good to know what the difference is, but I'm fairly convinced from the research I had done that it's not going to make an appreciable difference. That given the shape and the four sides of this peninsula, the calculations from my experience and working with all of the other comparisons would be about the same.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper, you had one final remark?
If I may, just want to point out, and maybe this is for Councillor Predko and Graziano, but shore road allowance on islands, for example, is not calculated anywhere on Georgian Bay, but it is on 6 Mile Lake and Go Home Lake. And that means not just a peninsula, but all the way around an island that you're going to get dinged. So I would suggest that you look into that, because I think it's pretty inequitable when 90% of the islands in our township you don't have to pay for your shore road allowance. There's no such thing on an island, but it's totally because of when the Crown recognized shore road allowance, or the province did, and in many of the cases out in Georgian Bay, they recognized shore road allowance or went after it prior to the land being owned by other individuals. Whereas in your particular case, it's not like that, but it seems rather inequitable to me. So I think you should think about that and take a look at GeoHub and review that and discuss it with the clerk's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any further hands raised. I have moved by Councillor Predko, seconded by Councillor Cooper. Be it resolved, the council passed the closing bylaw 2023-043 to stop up, close, and convey part of the original Shore Road allowance in front of lot 30, concession 10, designated as parts 2, 3, 4 on plan 35R-27054, and part of lot 30, concession 10, shown as road allowance on M 326, designated as part 1, plan 35R-27054, formerly Gibson, now in the township of Georgian Bay, the district municipality of Muskoka, for 7958 Go Home Lake Shore for the purchase price of $74,943.60 plus HST. And the council passed a deeming bylaw 2023-044 to deem part of Plan M 326 Gibson, now in the township of Georgian Bay, the district municipality of Muskoka, not to be a registered plan of subdivision for the purpose of the Planning Act of 1990 CP 13 S50 Part 3. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. All right. Next item, the staff report about a consent agreement on for B 21-08. To our plan, please.
Morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you. The property we're dealing with here is the leftover from an Ontario Land Tribunal discussion that goes back for a ways. And a condition for site plan agreement on it that has been put on by previous decision that is no longer applicable because we can't deal with it on a single lot basis, as you are now aware of. So the decision or the alternative here was to take a look at something like this, like a consent agreement to put on the property in place of the site plan agreement. And so we're just looking for and since site consent agreements cannot be delegated to staff, we're looking for that delegation to the mayor and to the clerk to move forward on the consent agreement.
And this, just to confirm, this consent agreement was agreed to by the Committee of Adjustment. Was it last month or 2 months ago?
Yes, it
And
was a
so-
condition that would have been changed from site plan in order to deal with a number of bigger things on some properties and others.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Council, any questions? Councilor Jarvis.
Is there any, I mean, this is a piece of property. Can you tell us where this is?
Hmm?
I'll have to look it up because I can't really tell you.
It's not specifically the Musquash, but if you go down a little bit to the southeast, basically where all the sawdust and offcuts were, just to the east, southeast of where the Musquash comes around. Yeah. So it was that thing we talked about a few meetings ago.
Just to clarify it further.
Councilor Cooper.
Councilor Jarvis, it basically runs right into the Musquash. So it's a highly sensitive area too. Fish habitat, etc.
And there was a site of plan agreement agreed to prior to the province changing the way we handle site plan agreements. So this is just replacing that site plan agreement with a consent agreement. Any other questions? I have moved by Councillor Bocheck, seconded by Councillor Predko. Be it resolved that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign a consent agreement as recommended by the planning department with 1345-610 Ontario Inc. for 20506 Georgian Bay Shore. All those in favor? And that is carried. Moved by Councillor Graziano, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. Whereas the Township of Georgian Bay passed site plan control bylaw 2020-022 And whereas section 41 of the Planning Act states a council that passes the bylaw under subsection 2 shall appoint an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality as an authorized person for the purpose of subsection 4 of that agreement. Therefore, be it resolved that council appoint the director of planning, manager of planning, and the CAO as authorized persons for the purpose of section 41(4) of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, as amended. Any questions? Councillor Hazelton, followed by Councillor Graziano.
So I understand that we do need to pass authority to the planning department for dealing with these kinds of things. We have a bylaw in place today that or a resolution or something that says that when any commercial property has a change in a site plan, that site plan will come back for visibility of council before it is approved. I think we actually have the right to determine whether we approve it or not. I don't know if this changes that, but what I wanted to highlight here is this. If there is a significant development in our community and the community have no say in the matter, and the way they get say is through council, then if staff make a decision and the community is not happy, then staff owns the issue. And I'm not sure that's a fair burden to put on staff. I think that if there is an opportunity for community input on a matter, and if that, given that council represents the community, I think that if there are tough decisions, and generally the commercial properties require or are involved in tough decisions, I think that council should own some of the responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean council has to approve it per se, but I think that the matter should come before council to provide guidance to staff on how they should, what actions they should take. So I think that we need to tweak the wording in whatever we approve here, such that we set a framework where on matters like this, site plan control for commercial properties, because it doesn't apply to residential properties anymore, that these matters are brought by staff to council for review and comment and guidance before staff go and take actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question to the clerk. Was this a recorded vote, if memory serves me correctly, and when it initially came before council? I believe that Councillor Bocek requested that it be recorded. Was that the case?
I don't know offhand. I'd have to go back and check some minutes. But I don't know what resolution you're asking for, sorry.
Sorry, the bylaw 2020-022.
I would have to go back and look at the minutes. Let me.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
I sort of, I'm of the same mind as Councillor Hazelton. I wanted to say that a couple of things. One is that we want to make sure that in the future, we don't run into situations like we discussed yesterday in closed session with certain commercial developments. We've had a number of challenges over the years with commercial development in our township, and I think not only should staff own the decision making, but I think council needs to as well, to be able to. The council is the front line for our constituents, and we need to be involved in the process. And I note there are a number of municipalities recently that have developed practices that relate to this. And I cite one here, which is the municipality of large growing municipality of Milton. And basically it says in their wording around this particular matter that council may request that certain proposal be presented to council prior to final approval. And I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not taking it away from the staff, but actually cooperating together. We'd work together on this so that we have decision-making not only from staff, but decision-making from our council who are representing our constituents. And I'd like to see that as part of this. And I really would prefer not to have to support this as it stands. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So let's understand the legislation and, two concepts with it. Number one is that myself, the planning department, have no problem at all presenting information to council. None whatsoever, right? You should know what's going on. However, the direction from that is to be taken as just suggestions. Site plan was removed from councils, all councils in Ontario, because of quote unquote political meddling in issues which were technical, supposed to be technical in nature. And unfortunately, politics, whatever way you wish to define that, entered into site plan control over the years, which is why it was removed, not just on the small ones for altogether site plan, but also removed on commercial from council's ability to approve, refuse, or to modify. But going back, I have no problems at all. I said the department has no problems at all providing you with a presentation on information. And you may provide suggestions, guidance, recommendations, and so on and so forth for us to take to heart. But at the end of the day, it would be the three appointed officers or one of the three appointed officers that looks at site plan control as a technical issue within that and the things that are being requested or required under site plan control to move forward with whether or not it should be signed and the agreement should be signed or not. That is my understanding of how the legislation changed and therefore that extremely important role that you provide in terms of constituents and comments in that respects, but also respecting the site plan control as a technical rather than planning, overall planning public meeting kind of process.
If I can paraphrase that before going to our clerk, what you're basically saying that this is a provincially mandated appointment.
The appointment is, but you said the councillors have pointed out that there's no problem at all with having conversations about these things. And some of these are small, right? You mentioned the word commercial councillor, and that's perfectly fine. You mentioned other developments, there may be small things on those other developments, but there may be some bigger things. So presentation wise is not a problem. But we have to remember at the end of the day, those are suggestions to staff, just like it may be suggestions to other departments where they have a legislative requirement to fulfill their appointed officer requirement.
Thank you. Over to Clerk Way. I saw your finger hovering.
I just have an answer for Councillor Graziano. It was not a recorded vote. It passed February 10th, 2020, following our staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Way. I do have an additional question, but
Please.
you, okay. Based on Councillor Cooper's comments, I would agree. I would like to see some oversight through council. I have no issues delegating. However, at the same time, I think that we should be accountable to our constituents through reviewing future requests. So I echo Councillor Cooper's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, followed by Councillor Bocheck, please.
Yeah, I'll echo that. So that'll be quick. That part will be quick. Is it possible that we need to have something within this motion that reflects that information will be forthcoming to council prior to these things being signed off on? Or is that not necessary?
I already whispered in our clerk's ear that I think we should add a paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
But because I think council's now starting to set a definite theme or direction here.
Yeah.
Councillor Bocheck.
I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but I was under the impression that perhaps when we give the signing authority to individuals in the township that we would receive notification, maybe through the consent agenda, that this had happened. That way, we're at least privy to the information and we can review it. And if we want it pulled from the consent agenda, council has that ability to review. And I don't know if that's part of the procedure bylaw or not, but I think we should have the ability to see what has been approved and signed. And then if we need to pull it and ask questions about it, we could. I don't know if we can do that or not.
If I can make a comment here on this round, I think we should, as our Director of Planning, Mr. Smith has told us, we're stuck in a political situation. I think with this motion, we can be political in return. And what I mean by that is I think we should add a paragraph that basically says that we're going to appoint these folks as authorized persons, but that a presentation, a report must be made to council prior to their signing. And the report might be a one paragraph report in some cases, or it might be a one-day discussion for all we know. We don't know.
Yeah, what my feelings on this is that a lot of constituents will come to me or phone me and ask me about what course something took. And if we're left completely out of the loop and the signing authority was delegated, we don't have any access to the information.
Yes. Yeah. So therefore, I think it's appropriate, personally, I'm not speaking for council yet. I think it's appropriate that we ask that staff inform us prior to their signing of a document. I mean, we had an example of that yesterday.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah,
that I think that's appropriate. So let's craft a sentence.
I did feel it was that original.
Well, I got some verbiage here.
The meeting is gonna go a lot.
Let's go to Councillor Predko because he hasn't spoken this first round, and then we'll go
Yeah.
second rounds. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, your worship. So I was just really, I have nothing unique to add to this conversation other than pointing out that at the recent orientation training for counselors on planning issues, this was a slide present on the presentation that it's been removed as an approval point for council, but it's a consultative point.
Mr. Smith, is your hand up a second time? Okay, I'll go to you and then then if additional comments, then we'll start those with Councillor Cooper after Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Site plan controls can be anything from 2 pages to 30 or 40 pages in length. We do minor amendments to it. We change the name. Theoretically, the motion, if you bring it forward, would delay any number of things from minor to quote unquote major. And I can't provide you other than changing a name or an address theoretically may drive a change to an agreement, which because it's registered, or some other minor changes in that, a change in ownership from Bob to Susan kind of thing. So I would like to be able to say that, that you provide some discretion that the concepts of the minor are going to move forward in a timely manner with staff's approval, which is again, what the problem was. We don't meet all the time. Let's move forward on things. Let's keep the business versus the major things. And don't get me wrong, unfortunately, I can't provide you with what that concept of major is, other than it's bigger than the minor in that regard. So, just putting it all in front of you every time we're back to where we were before, other than at the end of the day, the vote, the resolution, the discussion is quote unquote not binding. So some discretion within that to keep this new business of moving forward with your ratepayers, big and small kind of thing is, I think, important to distinguish within that where you're retaining everything that needs to come before we can sign.
All right, well, we'll ask that question because council's, I'm going to give council an opportunity for a second round before we get. And so the question is, can we, in your comments, consider how you would accept being notified? In other words, like through the CIP or like a other, or Sir, you can, the information, council information package versus say the consent agenda. And so if you want to make some reference to that, then we can include that in our motion. So Councillor Cooper, I'm going to start with you, and then I see Councillors Hazelton and Bocheck for the second round.
I do have a couple of comments, but I defer to Council Hazelton first and then I'll come right in behind him if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you. The whole point of 2020-2022, or sorry, -22, was to put parameters around what define minor and major. And so if we read through that, it has all the language in that bylaw that allows the planning department to approve the minor changes. And so we don't need to invent that language again. What I think we are talking about, and I think there's sort of a consensus here, is that if it's not minor, and again, 2020-22 defines minor. If it's not minor, then I think it should be as a minimum, in my opinion, on the consent agenda, or perhaps a report, don't know, but I don't think it should be in CIP. I think it should be on the consent agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you for letting me change the order there. I look, we've got to use common sense in terms of what we ask our planning department to do, and I fully understand that some things are very minor in nature, and but we need to be very careful. We know that, for example, we discussed an example yesterday about an ECA. I'm not talking about where it was, but just the term ECA, that isn't minor. Some might think of signing off on an ECA is minor, but we know in some cases it isn't minor. And so I would just suggest that that be kept in mind, and B, that I would like to see it on the consent agenda as opposed to the CIP. I think it's really bring some visibility to us in person. Finally, I understand the provincial situation, so I appreciate what our mayor has said and our planning department. I understand that somebody has to sign off, but we need to remember that we want the expertise of the planning department. We need the sign off from those that have the ability to sign off on it with some authority. But at the same time, we have a job too. And so I think what's been suggested here would help us meet that situation, so we don't sign off on ECAs in the future when we shouldn't. Thank you.
Councillor Bocheck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think for efficiency on this one, if council's not going to get into the weeds on this and really has no decision-making powers, in the consent agenda, a simple laundry list. No details, just a simple laundry list of the application number, a general description of what it was. And that way, if a counselor has a concern with it, they have an avenue to say, hey, I got to go talk to Dave about this because I believe there's some things that I can add to this. We're not going to be in the formulation of decision-making when it comes to these applications, but it sure would nice to know what they are. Without reports and the time that it takes to make reports for us, just a laundry list would be fine for me.
I've drafted up a fourth paragraph, and I'd like to read it for council's consideration. And it simply reads, and that staff include on the consent agenda prior to signing any application not minor per bylaw 2020-022.
Yeah.
So we're just making reference to the major, minor. It's almost like a musical score. And be on the consent agenda. Councillor Cooper, you want
I think the wording is just very, very good. And I just would like to remind us that even though we aren't in the sort of decision-making position, we're going to be informed. And one of the things that we can do as councillors is inform our planning staff of certain sort of situations, so that we don't end up, for example, with 60 docks in Church Bay. That was a situation that was a sleight of hand. So there's a lot of those happening in the past, and we need to avoid that in the future. So that's why I raised this issue this morning. Thank you.
Counselor Bocheck.
So if I'm under the understanding that if it meets the 4 tests of being minor,
The minor is per the bylaw that we passed in 2020
Okay.
-22.
okay, so if
There's
it's
not a variance.
right, so if it's not minor in nature, or as we're calling minor in nature, then it would come to
Yeah.
council.
And I think that also addresses the concern that Mr. Smith had, that he doesn't want to come to us just because he sold a piece of property to Mr. Jones.
Right, right. No, I
Okay.
agree. Good.
All right, so I have moved by Counselor Graziano, second by Counselor Jarvis. Whereas the Township of Georgian Bay passed site plan control bylaw 2020-022. And whereas section 41, part 4.0.1 of the Planning Act states the council that passes the bylaw under subsection 2 shall appoint an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality as an authorized person for the purpose of subsection 4 of 2022 C12 Schedule 5 S7 Part 3. Therefore, be it resolved, the council appoint the director of planning, manager of planning, and the CAO as authorized persons for the purpose of section 41(4) of the Planning Act RSO 1990 as amended, and that staff include on the consent agenda prior to signing any application not minor per bylaw 2020-022. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you.
Huge step forward.
Okay. Now,
Perhaps the biggest.
moved by Counselor Cooper, second by Counselor Hazelton. Be it resolved, the Planning Act adopt bylaw 2023-045 to confirm the proceedings of the April 4th, 2023 council meeting. All those in favor? Well, we got more. And moved by Counselor Hazelton, seconded by Counselor Graziano. Be it resolved, the Planning Council does now adjourn at 9:48 a.m. until May 9th, 2023, or 9 a.m. at 9 a.m. or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? And that is carried. And I'm going to propose that we start our committee of the whole at 10 o'clock. So that gives you 12 minutes to stand up, stretch, run away, and come back. Thank you.